I've just stepped off the canal path because there was another dog coming that my dog sometimes fights with. I've stepped into these little woods. I don't come in here very often, but the last time I was down here, it's just kind of being in the same place, it's just reminded me. The last time I was down here, I was talking about Max Velman's idea of reflexive monism. And that did kind of awaken some thoughts in me again to do with that, really. What he says is, or what reflexive monism and other similar ideas from other people, it's really a response to representative theories of perception. A conventional representative theory of perception says you look out into the world and you see a tree, and what's happening when you see a tree is the tree is is represented somehow in your mind, and it's that representation that you have access to, and you enact some kind of perceptual processes on that representation. So seeing takes place in the mind. But Velman says that's probably rubbish. Why would you represent a tree in your mind when there's a perfectly good tree out there? And what he basically says is that the tree and the space between yourself and the tree and the thought process of the kind of neuronal purely physical processes that's happening in your mind whilst you look at the tree are all part of the same process. There isn't the tree out there and then your mind inside your head doing the thinking. These aren't his phrase, but I've heard it phrased in this way. Your mind kind of loops out from the brain to the tree and incorporates both physical tree, physical brain. And mind is kind of supervenient on that whole loop. Which is a really difficult thing to get your head around. At least I find it really difficult to get your head around. Simply because when I think of it in those terms, I imagine some kind of physical ectoplasmic substance looping out and wrapping itself around the tree and then coming back in again. Or as some kind of force field or some kind of electromagnetic radiation beaming out of my head. Which is almost the way that it is configured, or no, that's right, actually. But there certainly are kind of theories of mind or theories of consciousness which do suggest that. And which have not been substantiated at all, I think it's fair to say. And here I'm thinking of something like Rupert Sheldrake's ideas to do with morphic resonance, for example, where it does seem to be suggesting that there is kind of auras emanating from minds and from other objects as well, which capture things in the field of their influence. It's a very engaging idea, but there's no way of detecting it. It doesn't seem to be anything other than a kind of interesting idea, drawing on analogies to do with electromagnetic radiation or magnetism or something like that, and also feels a little bit unnecessary. There's probably better ways of doing it than conjuring up a new force in the world. So I'm just wondering what that means in terms of mind. I think it does require a completely different interpretation of what mind is. And I'm interested to know what David Chalmers talks about in this regard. Because I've read some of Chalmers and I've listened to some of his videos and I find it very difficult to grasp. He seems to be arguing for a kind of panpsychism in which mind is kind of knotted up into matter. Which again, I don't know what to think about that really. But I need to find out more clearly. But I think it's interesting that space seems to be operating in all these ways, and quite often, particularly in somebody like Sheldrake, which is a bit surprising, that view of space seems to be very, very Newtonian. That space is just this kind of neutral backdrop through which these forces, these auras, these electromagnetic or consciousness fields kind of propagate. And that's not really how space operates, at least that's not how I understand it. I think post-Einstein and post-Hilbert and all those people who talked about space 100 years ago, we can't really see space as just a blank canvas on which the objects and forces of the world are drawn, or as the kind of still surface of a pool upon which all the kind of ripples of forces operate. We have to think of space as composing the world as well as kind of staging it. Now I don't know what that means in terms of Velman's reflexive monism, or in terms of Sheldrake's morphic resonance, or in terms of any of that stuff, other than to say that to me it seems very, very unlikely that mind is something that operates as a kind of field in space, any more than matter actually operates as a kind of field in space. I mean, that's not what matter is. Matter doesn't do that as far as I'm aware. It doesn't. This tree that I'm looking at here is this beautiful sycamore tree. That doesn't exist in a Newtonian way, in which there is this empty space around it and then there's a tree in it. At least that's not how I understand it. My understanding is that this tree is composed ultimately of space, for want of a better word, probably not entirely three-dimensional space, probably some other kind of space, at an ultimately subatomic quark level or whatever, at the level of the Higgs boson, let's say. I don't know what that means really, but it is a kind of geometrical process at work, articulating the forces and the apparent materiality of that tree, kind of generating it. It is a series of complex, multidimensional folds in this stuff we call space, in which we seem to have direct access to 3 dimensions of, but presumably has other dimensions outside of that, who knows. So it seems to me that if we are going to get a more interesting understanding of mind, we can't think of it in those Newtonian or even pre-Newtonian terms of, there's a lumpy object called the brain that kind of gives off radio waves, or it's this weird kind of fluid in which these ripples take place. I can't really get any of that. I think it would have to take on, I think, and take seriously a mix of something like Velman's reflexive monism, in which mind exists in space, with a revisiting of what space really means. Space after Einstein, after Hilbert, after all the physics of the 20th century.